Hi, secondary one. Today I am gonna explain the summary of Wuthering Heights. So, in the late winter month of 1801, a man named Lockwood rents a manor house, large house called Thrush Grass Grange in the isolated moor land covered in a short grass country of England. Here, he meets his harsh landlord, Heathcliff, a wealthy man who lives in the ancient manor of Wuthering Heights, 4 miles away from the Grange. In this wild, stormy countryside, Lockwood asks his housekeeper, Nellie, to tell him the story of Heathcliff and the strange resident of Wuthering Heights. Nelly agrees, and Lockwood writes down his recollections of her tale in his diary. These written recollections form the main part of Wuthering Heights. Nelly remembers her childhood. As a young girl, she works as a servant at Wuthering Heights for the owner of the manor, Mr. Earnshaw, and his family. One day, Mr. Earnshaw goes to Liverpool and returns home with an orphan boy whom he will raise with his own children. At first, the Earnshaw children, a boy named Hindley and his younger sister Catherine, hate the dark skinned Heathcliff. But Catherine quickly comes to love him, and the two soon grow inseparable, spending their days playing on the moors. After this, after his wife's death, Mr. Earnshaw grows to prefer Heathcliff to his own son. And when Hindley continues his cruelty to Heathcliff, Mr. Earnshaw sends Hindley away to college, keeping Heathcliff nearby. 3 years later, Mr. Earnshaw dies and Hindley inherits Wuthering Heights. He returns with a wife, Frances, and immediately seeks revenge on Heathcliff. Once an orphan, later a pampered and favored son, Heathcliff now finds himself treated as a common laborer, forced to work in the fields. However, Heathcliff continues his close relationship with Catherine. One night, they wander to Thrushcross Grange, hoping to tease Edgar and Isabella Linton, the cowardly, arrogant children who live there. Catherine is bitten by a dog and is forced to stay at the Grange to recover for 5 weeks, during which time Mrs. Linton works to make her a proper young lady. By the time Catherine returns, she has become in love with Edgar, and her relationship with Heathcliff grows more complicated. When Frances dies after giving birth to a baby boy named Hareton, Hindley moves down into the depth of alcoholism and behaves even more cruelly toward Heathcliff. Eventually, Catherine's desire for social advancement promotes her to become engaged to Edgar Linton, despite her overpowering love for Heathcliff. Heathcliff runs away from Wuthering Heights, staying away for 3 years and returning shortly after Catherine and Edgar's marriage. When Heathcliff returns, he immediately sets about seeking revenge on all who have wronged him, having come into a vast and mysterious wealth. He dishonestly lends money to the drunken Hindley, knowing that Hindley will increase his debts and fall into deeper sadness. When Hindley dies, Heathcliff inherits the manor, He also places himself in line to inherit Grass Grange by marrying Isabella Linton, whom he treats very cruelly. Catherine becomes ill, gives birth to a daughter, and dies. Heathcliff begs her spirit to remain on earth. She may take whatever form she will. She may haunt him, drive him mad, just as long as she doesn't leave him alone. Shortly thereafter, Isabella flees to London and gives birth to Heathcliff's son, named Linton after her family. She keeps the boy with her there. 13 years passed, during which Nellie Dean serves as Catherine's daughters. Seem old at Thrushcross Grange. Young Catherine is beautiful and headstrong like her mother, but her mood is modified by her father's gentler influence. Young Catherine grows up at the Grange with no knowledge of Wuthering Heights. One day, however, wandering through the moors, she discovers the manor. She meets Hareton, Hindley and Francis' son, and plays together with him. Soon afterwards, Isabella dies, and Linton comes to live with Heathcliff. Heathcliff treats his sickly, moody son even more cruelly than he treated the boy's mother. 3 years later, young Catherine meets Heathcliff on moors and makes a visit to Wuthering Heights to meet Linton. She and Linton begin a secret romance conducted entirely through letters. When Nellie destroys Catherine's collection of letters, girl begins sneaking out at night to spend time with her frail young lover, who asks her to come back and nurse him back to health. However, it quickly becomes clear that Linton is pursuing Catherine only because Heathcliff is forcing him to. Heathcliff hopes that if Catherine marries Linton, his legal claim upon Thrushcross Grange and his revenge upon Edgar Linton will be complete. One day, Edgar Linton grows ill and nears death. Heathcliff deceives Nellie and Catherine back to Wuthering Heights and holds them prisoner until Catherine marries Linton. Soon after the marriage, Edgar dies, and his death is quickly followed by the death of sickly Linton. Heathcliff now controls both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. He forces Catherine to live at Wuthering Heights and act as a common servant, while he rents Thrushcross Grange to Lockwood. Nellie's story ends as she reaches the present. Lockwood, horrified, ends his tendency, the period of renting house at Thrushcross Grange, and returns to London. However, 6 months later, he pays a visit to Nellie and learns of further developments in the story. Though Catherine originally mocked Hareton's ignorance and literacy in an act of punishment, Heathcliff ended Hareton's education after Hindley died. Catherine grows to love Hareton as they live together at Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff becomes more and more obsessed with the memory of the elder Catherine, to the extent that he begins speaking to her ghost. Everything he sees reminds him of her. Shortly after a night spent walking on the moors, Heathcliff dies. Hareton and young Catherine inherit Wuthering Heights, and Thrush, Thrush's Grange, and they plan to be married on the next New Year's Day. After hearing the end of the story, Lockwood goes to visit the graves of Catherine and Heathcliff. That's enough for today, and see you next video.